Never yield. Trump administration officials today, was noted by many, failed to name the enemy, radical Islamists. The country has spent more than $14 billion battling the Islamic State, approximately $5 trillion fighting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we now have 11,000 of our forces. But year after year, administration officials refusing to call radical Islamists by name, whether under President Bush or President Obama, and at least for today, the Trump administration. My first guest with Vice President Pence in Shanksville, Pennsylvania this morning, the crash site of United Flight 93. Joining us to talk about the 9/11 commemorations, the federal government response to Hurricane Irma. We're joined tonight by Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, also the first U.S. Navy SEAL to serve as a cabinet officer. Great to have you here.
Radical Islamic terrorism.
It is said.
It is said.
Done. Good for you. It is strange because this president has been clear throughout, naming the enemy. And suddenly today, on this day of all days, for the words not to have been until the Interior Secretary just used the expression, not to hear it. There are many of us, particularly in the environs of Washington, D.C. and New York City, who lost friends, colleagues on that day. There is a bloodlust that remains and an unresolved order of national business the president has vowed to carry out and complete.
Well, and we had a cabinet meeting on Saturday at Camp David, and I can tell you our nation's defense is in no better hands than with General Mattis, and I fought with him in Fallujah. He understands radical Islamic terrorism as well as General Kelly, who lost a son. You have two four-star Marines that are terrific, that clearly understand the threat.
And I would expect no less. This president reveres, obviously, both of those generals, and the American people revere this president who has made a vow to destroy the enemy. And is getting it done more impressively.
Well, and then a lot of the conversations also, you have Hurricane Harvey, which is now the beginning of the recovery. You have Irma, as Irma approached.
In 2 weeks' time, we're talking about.
And don't forget about the fires out west.
Right.
Montana, my home state, is on fire over a dozen.
Much of the Northwest.
Much of the Northwest. A lot of reasons for the fire. You know, some of it is the fire seasons are longer, they're hotter, but a lot of it is we have failed to manage our woods. We have failed to remove dead and dying timber, and we forgot the principles of active forest management. So we're going to do a pivot. We're going to do a lot better on that. Hurricane Irma was not as bad in some places as predicted, but certainly in the Virgin Islands, the territories, which the Department of Interior oversees, devastating damage to the point where even the power system may not be able to be repaired. It may have to be rebuilt. Certainly, we have surface vessels on their way. We sent a team from HHS.
When you say surface vessels, we should be clear about this. I mean, this is an unprecedented act on the part of any administration to engage the U.S. Navy in support of those who are victimized by the storm, who are hit by the storm, to try to restore quickly power and supplies, and try to build a quick path to normalcy.
Well, certainly this president has focused on the hurricanes, on the fires. He brought his cabinet together, and the guidance was crystal clear. Get to yes, forward lean, put the forces and what they need in the front lines, and give the governors every bit of assistance they need.
The storm, Irma, now tropical storm, moving northward. We're expecting it even ultimately to reach the northeast with some considerable strength, perhaps not tropical storm, but considerable strength and a lot of rain. We also still have the aftermath of Harvey. This has got to be a huge undertaking for the Department of Interior, for the federal government at large. How are we doing in terms of protecting all of the parks, all of that precious ecological system that is Florida and the Gulf Coast?
Well, the rebuild in southern Florida is going to take a while. We also want to look at making sure that the fires that were in the Northwest, we get to that timber. You can recover a lot of that timber because we're going to have a problem with building materials. And if we're going to rebuild Houston, we're going to rebuild Florida, it should be made in America building materials. That means we've done inventories of where we are on drywall and framing lumber. And we need to act now to make sure we get those materials where they need to go.
How quickly do you think it can be done?
I can tell you that the president is laser focused on this, and he's a business president, and he's a builder. He loves building. And when you start talking about building, the president's eyes light up. He just likes it. I can tell you that every cabinet member is engaged. I think up till now, I'd give the president an A. I think now it's going to be looking at recovery, which is Small Business Association, making sure that all of us in the cabinet, do our part, lean forward and push the assets where they need. Leave no neighborhood behind.
Right. And quite a few neighborhoods in Texas and Florida. One pauses and thinks about what we've been hit with and what this president has had to respond to in terms of these two massive storms.
We've also had some really good governors. The governor of Texas has been absolutely super. Governor Scott has been forward-leaning, absolutely magnificent performance by the governors, and they pushed that leadership down. Local communities, the heroes have been the first responders. Coast Guard. From a naval officer, Coast Guard stepped in, rescued thousands of citizens, a lot in Texas, and God bless our Coast Guard. They did magnificent, and hats off to them.
Amen. And all of our military, and all of our first responders, our law enforcement, let's keep it all together.
Absolutely. We live in a great country.
It's a pretty good country we live in, isn't it?
You know what? At times like this, in crisis, I'm just proud to be American. I was there at the Flight 93. I had not been to the Flight 93 National Monument before. It was impressive, heartfelt, and this is an example of what a great nation can do from crisis, make something that's truly special. And I think it looks at our values.
And as the Vice President reminded us what heroes aboard that flight did for a lot of Americans and for this country.
Save the Capitol, they're heroes.
Amen.
Absolutely.